Hi there and welcome to the RevOps show. Today's episode dives into behavioral science concepts, and while most of them tie neatly together, there is one that stands out a little off theme. Jess is all about cohesion, but this one made the cut because it gets to the heart of something huge: how we deal with uncertainty, or more accurately, how we avoid it. Whether you're building internal processes or guiding buyers through a decision, understanding how people work is key to making the whole experience smoother for you and for them. So with that, let's get into it.
Jess, you
Doug?
say you don't like recording on Fridays, but I don't believe you.
I don't actually like recording on Fridays. The problem is the rest of the week just has become unwieldy for you and I.
I think deep down you like recording on Fridays.
Okay, sure. We'll go with that.
You know, you might not be able to admit it to yourself, Jess, but I can tell. I can tell. Not only on a Friday, but on a Friday, technically we're closed.
I wasn't supposed to be here today.
You weren't. You weren't.
But here we are.
But you know, the RevOps show is never closed.
No, it's not.
We are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
I don't know about that, but sure.
Well, we are. You can listen to an episode anytime.
You can.
That's the beauty of recordations, Jess.
Recordations? Are we sure that's a word?
I actually don't know. I think it is.
Wow, it is.
And what does it
The
mean?
act of making a document an official public record, typically by entering it into a government records office.
And we are a government records office, are we?
Are we? We're gonna make
We're the government of I don't know. I think we should declare our own republic. What do you think? That's actually we could.
You know, as a Texan, that is something I can get on board with.
Is there good money in running governments and being a government?
I don't actually know. I think it depends on the type of government you're running.
I was going to say something smart, but nothing came.
No, that's because it's Friday. It's because it's Friday.
It is Friday. You know what, Jess? It's a good Friday.
It is Good Friday. That is accurate.
We're not. That's not causing any problems, is it? That we're recording on Good Friday. It doesn't. Like, we don't need to edit that out or anything, do we?
I don't. I mean, I'm the one that's going to get in trouble, not you.
I do not want my rabbi yelling at me about this. So, Jess, what do you do Easter weekend? Are you a big Easter weekend person? I know you sacrifice a family member on 4th of July. Do you do that on Easter?
Family barbecue. No, we don't do that on Easter. It depends. It depends on what the rest of the family is doing. So this year it's going to be small. My brother-in-law is going to his wife's family. So we're just having brunch on Sunday, and that is it.
Just the Cardenases
and my father-in-law. So 5 of us.
Okay. So no big kitchen prep for you this year.
No, thank God. I actually made that judgment call 3 months ago and told them all I'm not doing it this year. Somebody else needs to take it. So I have a 6th grader and a 3rd grader, as you know.
So that's just quiet.
April. Well, and like one of the kids' birthdays is in April and one of the kids' birthdays in May. And no one told me that was a terrible idea. No one gave me a heads up. So it's just like April and May is a mad dash to just get through life. And that's where we're at right now.
So is it a bad idea because the birthdays are so close, or is there something about April and May that it's bad to have?
It's because the birthdays are close. April and May is typically nuts for school. We live in San Antonio, so Fiesta is a giant holiday here. I get that nobody else knows what that is.
Is that when the flowers fight?
That is when the flowers fight, yes, the Battle of Flowers. The only thing I can equate it to, and it's not this large, but is New Orleans.
Mardi Gras.
Mardi Gras. I mean, it is kind of like San Antonio's Mardi Gras, so the city shuts down. There's all kinds. So we've got that going on.
I like that. San Antonio's Mardi Gras.
It is. San Antonio's Mardi Gras.
That should be the tagline.
Should be. Yeah. So
I could ask a question, but it would probably not be appropriate, so I won't.
Yep. So we're going to move on past that. So yeah, So I'm just like trying to survive right now. Is where I'm at.
When does the school year end?
School ends early this year, so we're done after Memorial Day.
Okay, so that's the end of May, though, right?
That's the first week of June is when it. Yeah. So I think Memorial Day, and then we don't go back. Typically, we go into mid-June, but they've changed it this year.
Yeah, I always found the last 6 weeks of the school year, my kids were done.
Well, and both of my kids are in a standardized testing year, so we've got that on top of that level of stress in our household on top of everything else.
Sounds like fun.
So yeah, I'm just trying to make it to June.
Fun and game for the
gardeners
is.
There it is. And then I decided to throw our team meeting in the midst of that because that seemed like a great idea at the time.
Yeah, I gotta book our flights. I gotta book my flights for that still. Don't look at me like that. I feel completely invalidated. I feel disapproval.
I'm hoping our team doesn't listen to this because I've been on everybody to get their flights booked.
Yeah, but see, I'm not on it. I'm never on any of those messages.
Right, because you can do what you want. It's the reality of the situation.
But then the problem is then I forget about it.
So the other thing is, to be fair, you kind of have to work around like whatever we need to know what everybody else is doing, so then we can know when
that's what I'm saying.
You're coming in and when you're departing. Yep.
See, I was my procrastination is justified, Jess. We
Always.
should do procrastination principle as a focus of an episode at some point.
Okay.
Maybe you know what? I'm going to see how I can weave in procrastination into our conversation today.
It might fit. It might fit.
I think it does. You know, I want to talk about what we're going to talk about today, but I'm uncertain about it. Jess, what are we talking about today?
So we're going to go over some behavioral science principles.
Episode types.
Yeah. This was an interesting one to put together because I try to build themes, and the state of the world. A theme park. Is that?
A park of themes.
Yep. The state of the world, the state of the market had me. So uncertainty is where we're going to start, and it's kind of the theme. How are people reacting given what's going on right now?
The dumpster fire, the shitstorm effect.
That's not one of them.
Not one.
The shitstorm effect is not on the list.
So it's interesting. You chose 6.
I did choose 6.
We'll see if we get through all 6.
We might not, and I'm aware of that. But
one of them, I was kind of like, one of them felt like it didn't fit.
I think I know which one didn't feel like it fit.
So I felt like we were playing a Sesame Street game, and you were going to sing. You want to sing one of these is not like the other ones?
I do not. You
know what? I think I've sung on this podcast more than you've sung on this podcast.
You have. I don't sing in public.
Well, just no one's here. It's just you and me.
Oh my God. We're not doing that.
We're not doing that? All right.
We're not doing that.
What are we going to do first, Jess?
Let's talk about ambiguity aversion. Uncertainty.
Ambiguity or uncertainty aversion. Let's tell everybody what it is, and then we can talk about it. So ambiguity aversion or uncertainty. By the way, with the exception of one, and I'll point out if we get to it, our source for all of this is the site Behavioral Economics. Ambiguity aversion or uncertainty aversion is the tendency to favor the known over the unknown, including known risks over unknown risks. For example, when choosing between 2 bets, isn't it funny how everything in behavioral economics comes down to a bet?
Thinking in bets.
And we're all making bets. For example, when choosing between 2 bets, we are more likely to choose the bet for which we know the odds, even if the odds are poor, than the one for which we don't know the odds.
This was actually fascinating to me. I've never thought about that concept of knowing the odds versus not knowing the odds. And it does feel right.
And I should say that it's the perception of knowing the odds.
Yep.
Right. And that's why we live, we tend to, if I say 90%, you think of that as, you'll think of that as certain, right? Even though 1 out of 10 times. Now, put odds on it put some stakes on it, you might not feel the same. If I told you there's a 90% chance you'll cross this street safely, right? If you don't cross the street, right, the not safely is you die. You're all of a sudden gonna look at that very differently.
Yep. Yep.
So where did you find it interesting? Why don't you give your perspective on it, and then I'll give mine.
As I was putting these together, I was thinking about the impact on sales in general, and like how do these things impact buyers versus sellers, right? If you think about a buyer, the impact is I'm going to purchase the product I have more information with, for the product I'm most familiar with, whether it's superior or not, right? And then so that then brought me to, how do you as a seller take that and make sure that you're playing into that, breeding that familiarity? And I'm saying selling organization, not necessarily salesperson, right? That aspect was interesting to me. And then the other piece, I think, where this comes into play is because you're looking for that certainty, and because you're looking as a buyer, you can fall into analysis paralysis, which we've talked about before. So then there's the risk of you trying to get too much information, and then you just freeze, which is going to come into play in some of the later ones we're going to talk about as well.
It's going to play into a lot of them, and I'm probably going to connect to one of your other ones in talking about this. You know, one of the things that you've got to look at as a seller here, and by the way, I'm sorry, I meant to pick up on a thought that you had. When you're in that analysis paralysis, what you're really in is that uncertainty paradigm. You're in that.
Yep.
You're in that uncertainty, aversion, that ambiguity, aversion, right? So that's what's driving it. I think as a seller, one of the things that you really have to pay attention to is, what are you selling and what's the role of change, right? So this is where the concept of continuous innovation versus discontinuous innovation comes to bear. How much does your customer have to change to be able to benefit from whatever it is that you might be selling? This is why services, by and large, are harder to sell than products are, right? If you look like, I know, uncertainty, the uncertainty bias impacted me on cars that I was buying, because I thought about buying an electric vehicle, but there are so many things about it that I wasn't quite, sure enough or confident enough. Yep. Right. And so, like, you don't need to sell me the benefit of, like, and I'm not in the market for a car anymore. So by the way, anybody that's selling electric vehicles, please, I'm not the right person. But don't talk to me about the car. Talk to me about the situation. And you've seen some of that begin to happen. How can you create greater clarity? How can you create more consistency? Which is also why a mistake that happens is, I see sellers, we spend far too much time trying to explain the solution, when really what we need to do is we need to sell the problem, because the customer understands the problem more. The customer is feeling the problem more, and getting connection and clarity on that, right? So what happens with ambiguity and uncertainty is it very quickly connects to a status quo bias.
Yeah.
What happens is we freeze, right? When people are uncertain, we don't do anything. It's like, imagine, think about this. You hear a sound, you don't know what that sound is, but it's a shocking sound. As you're walking down the street, what do? You stop.
Freeze. Yeah.
Right? You stop, you freeze, you wait, you listen, right? That is right, because uncertainty, our brain interprets uncertainty as danger, and so one of the things that happens is we'll move to things like one of my favorite examples is an experiment where this principle came about. Is this experiment where, given a choice between two bags that you have to pull a marble from, if you pull a marble from the bag, you win $100.
Mm-hmm.
One bag, has 50 red marbles and 50 black marbles. The other bag, you don't know what the split is. 80% of people in the experiment chose from the bag where they knew how many red and black marbles there were, right? Yep. So even though the odds weren't particularly good, right, we knew what they were, so we were more likely to do that. It's why if I tell you there's a 30% chance of rain, you'll go out, whereas if you don't know what the chance of rain is, you might not go out. Right. Even though 30% chance of rain, where I come from, 30% chance of rain means it's raining.
Yep.
See, that was a weatherman joke there. The other thing to do as a seller is call out the uncertainty, right?
Yep.
One of the reasons that we do process as much as we do process and we sell the process is what we're doing is we're creating a framework around which you can begin to understand what will you do in periods of uncertainty.
The other thing I found in this, I'm glad you brought this up, as I was kind of doing some research into this really attaches for the salesperson the need to build trust and have that clear communication that you're talking about. So if there's uncertainty, calling it out, right? And building that trust with the buyer that you're going to be open, honest, and clear with them about the situation. I mean, we've seen this, and this isn't sales, but we've seen this in implementations. If we're calling out, here are the unknowns, here are the potential roadblocks, here's where it's going to get dicey because we don't know, and we're going to have to figure out during this period. If we're clear about that, there's a comfort level and a trust that you don't have if you're not clear about that. And I think one thing that comes to play here, if you're trying to manage a sale, is making sure that you're super clear in that communication, calling those things out, building that trust.
Yeah. And what is trust? Trust is the perception that you're going to tell me the truth and the perception that you understand me. Right, which again gets back to why you've got to demonstrate and establish the problem before you start talking about the solution, right? Because I've got to demonstrate that I understand where you're coming from. I understand you. I understand the implications of this. I understand where and how it matters. And, you know, to a large degree, it's I've got your back. That's why people hire services.
Yep.
Is they'll have my back. They'll make sure, you know, that I'm okay. What are we going to do to protect those uncertainties? As a leader, as a matter of fact, I was just on a podcast the other day, and they asked me, where do I spend my time as a entrepreneur today compared to 20 years ago? And you know, the big difference to me today versus 20 years ago is the size of the team and the world at large. I mean, probably 20 years ago, I would have told you that the world had a lot of uncertainties. Boy, doesn't the world 20 years ago just feel a whole lot simpler today? Although, you know, you got to be careful. The good old days are never as good as they are old.
Right. Yeah.
But man, it wasn't crazy like this. Although 20 years ago, let's say 25 years ago, boy, 1997 feels like a really good year right now.
I was going to say, you're talking to the person who graduated and came of age around 2005. So that wasn't crazy. It was different crazy.
Yeah.
That was different, crazy uncertainty than what we're dealing with here. I don't know if it's comparable, but
I was talking to somebody about millennials, and they were saying, you know, I actually think millennials are resilient. They've got a bad rap, and I said, yeah, I think they're pretty resilient. They've only survived like 3 once in a lifetime. Yeah, it's anyways, the biggest, best thing you can do as a leader is create clarity. And how do you create clarity? How do you create pockets of certainty in an uncertain world? How do you create clarity in a world filled with ambiguity? Now, the danger is that you overplay to that, and I think we're going to get to that in our next concept. So, what's the next behavioral concept you wanted to talk about?
Well, we've brought it up. So, do we want to go to status quo next, or do we want to talk about certainty possibility effects next?
Let's do certainty possibility effect.
Okay. So certainty possibility effects.
Already, according to behavioral economics, changes in the probability of gains or losses do not affect people's subjective evaluations in linear terms. Where would behavioral economics be without Tversky and Kahneman?
Nowhere, apparently.
For example, a move from a 50 to 60% chance of winning a prize has a smaller emotional impact than a move from a 95% to 100% chance. The difference between uncertainty and certainty. So the certainty effect is really, in many ways, the inverse of the ambiguity aversion, right? We will pursue the perception of certainty, even if it's not better for us. Jess, would you rather have a 90% chance of winning $100 or a 10% chance of winning $1,000?
I'd rather have the 90% chance of winning.
Even though it's worth less.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? The 90% chance of winning $100 is worth $90. 10% chance of winning $1,000 is worth $100.
Yep.
Right. We did not practice this.
No, we did not.
Right. The possibility of going from a 95% chance of winning something to a 100% chance of something is a 5% improvement.
Yep.
The possibility of going from a 50% chance of winning something to a 60% chance of winning something is a 20% improvement. People will pay more for the 5% improvement. Actually, it's a little bit more than 5%. Sorry. 5 divided by 95. It's a 5.26% improvement. People will pay more for that because of the certainty.
Yep. I mean, we've talked about this in relation to sales probability many times, and how sales reps look at that.
Now, here's the other thing. People will perceive a bigger benefit going from a 0 to 5% chance of winning than from a 5 to 10% chance of winning, which is why so many people do stupid things at casinos.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, again, it gets back to this. We don't operate in the gray very well, right? We're very much, we kind of equate everything as 0 or 1. So like if I tell you there's not a 0% chance of winning, there's a 5% chance of winning, your brain goes, so you're telling me there's a chance.
Well,
right?
And like, so
but then we don't understand the gradients of difference in between.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that came up while I was looking into, and this is more possibility effect than certainty effect, but so lottery-like incentives, so you have a chance to win, are far more effective and motivating than like giving a probability, and it's a low probability. So that chance to win resonates more than 5%.
Mm-hmm.
Even though they could be the same thing.
Even though they could be a lot less.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So again, how do you position things around certainty? How do you demonstrate where? But so let's talk about status quo bias.
Okay.
If we go to status quo bias, according to behavioral economics, status quo bias is evident when people prefer things to stay the same by doing nothing. Also inertia, or by sticking with a decision made previously. This may happen even when only small transition costs are involved and the importance of the decision is great, right? An example of the status quo bias is the sunk cost fallacy. Jess, if you bought tickets to the San Antonio Spurs and the San Antonio Spurs didn't completely suck anymore, they've been pretty bad.
They're pretty bad. Yeah, I'm aware.
If you bought courtside seats, so you spent $500.
Yep.
And you bought it like 6 months ago, and there was like a major storm coming, right? So to get to the game, you're going to have to drive through a major storm. Would you go to the game? You probably would.
Yes.
Right. You spent $500 on the tickets.
Yes, I would.
Right. If I called you up that night and I said, yes, I got 2 free tickets, they would have cost $500.
No, I'm not going to the game.
Right.
Yep.
But even though at that point in time, it represents the exact same thing.
Right.
That's sunk cost fallacy, which is an example of status quo bias, right? I've made the decision.
Yep.
We stick to it, right? Why is that? Status quo has the perception of certainty, right? There's this perception that if I don't take an action, if I don't do something differently, then everything would be okay.
Yep.
Right? That everything will stay the same, even though the reality is nothing ever stays the same. There's still that perception.
Well, so your car buying analogy earlier actually comes into play here, at least for me. So I got a new car at the end of last year, but I got the same car that I had before, just a newer model. I did not look at other cars. I was very confident in my purchase. But you know what? I also didn't have to think a whole heck of a lot about it.
Right. Right. And so this gets back to, again, what's the role of change? So if we think about it from a selling perspective, if we think about it from a leadership or management perspective, what you've got to do, this is all about how is change being perceived, right? So this is why matters so much, right? As you're painting that picture, you need, one of the things that I used to do when I was a financial advisor, I worked with people that were officer level employees. Like my target customer was an officer level employee of a public company, just below the proxy level, right? So one of the challenges that they had was something called concentrated stock position, which meant I defined it as more than 50%. Some people define it as more than 80%, but more than a certain percentage of your net worth tied up in a single stock. And one of the main companies that I worked with was ExxonMobil, which now is just Exxon. And so I would, I was working with somebody that he had, $7 million in stock investments. 6 million of that was in Exxon. And the difficulty was, again, status quo bias. Well, the problem was always the stock was either going up, in which case they wanted to wait until it stopped. Like, well, let's wait until its rally is over. Or, it was going down, in which case they didn't want to sell it down. So there was always that fear to sell. That's status quo bias. So one of the things that I talked about is I would say, let's say that you woke up this morning and you had no money at all, right?
I would be very sad.
And your fairy godmother came down and gave you $7 million on one condition. You have to invest all of it in the stock market.
Oh, shit. Yeah.
Remember, you've got $7 million in the stock market right now, right? You have to put it all in.
Yeah.
My question to you is, how much of that are you putting into Exxon? How much Exxon are you buying? And their response was, well, I don't know, but I would definitely buy a good bit of Exxon. It's a really good company. It's right. I'm like, no, exactly. I agree with you 100%. But I'm curious, would you buy $6 million of Exxon?
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't buy that much.
Yeah.
And so I need you to understand, every morning you wake up, you make a buy-sell decision. There really is no such thing as hold, right?
Yeah.
If you own this stock and you don't sell it, you're buying it back, right? And so when I would create that, all of a sudden we got rid of that perception of there being a status quo. Did they go to a fully balanced portfolio like I would have recommended had the fairy godmother situation come to play? No, they didn't go to that extent.
Right.
We consistently moved them to the point where they had that balanced portfolio, right? And if you look at that, that's the status quo bias combined with the certainty, right? The perception that I know what ExxonMobil does. I know how they performed. It's what's gotten me here. And the uncertainty, it's the reason that people don't invest in the stock market is because of the ambiguity of the stock market and the perception of certainty. And again, getting people to understand where they are, how they impact, how their decisions, how decisions work is how you begin to get people to have the confidence to be able to take actions to make bets. Remember, every time someone makes a decision, they are making a bet. And that's what we're managing. That's why understanding behavioral economics is so important.
Yeah. And I think this one also goes to selling the problem, like you talked about before, because like inertia comes into play here, right? You're not just trying to manage the change, you're trying to manage the inertia. So you have to figure out a way to pull out of that. And so making them feel the problem, the issue at hand versus just the solution will allow that to happen. All right, let's talk about risk aversion.
Risk tolerance, Jess, shows how much uncertainty an individual is willing to accept to achieve a desired outcome, such as a potential monetary gain. For example, when offered an opportunity to buy a lottery ticket with equal chances of winning either $20 or $0, a risk-neutral person would be willing to pay up to $10, which is the expected value of the lottery ticket. Yep. Those willing to pay less than $10 would be classified as risk-averse, and those willing to pay more would be considered risk-seeking. Jess, would you pay $10 for a 50-50 chance to win $20?
I probably would.
Would you? I don't think you would. I'll do it right now. I'll give you $10.
Oh my gosh. Maybe not. I'm pretty risk averse. Probably not.
Well, see, risk averse really comes into a couple of things, right? All of these things come together, right? Because why do you work for a small business?
Because I like control.
Well, but you see, right? So there's that, which again gets back to, so you feel more certainty here. You feel more like a person.
Sure.
Right. You've always been, right. Even though the perception is it's safer. Right. So when we come into all these things, this is where like none of these principles operates on its own.
Right.
Right. But what you just saw is a concept that's closely related to risk aversion, which is loss aversion, right? And the challenge is losing $20. Losing $10 is as painful or more painful
than winning 20.
Then winning $20 is pleasurable.
Yeah.
Right. So the pain of losing $10 for something that like I could connect to why you like small businesses more. Do you know why you like small businesses more?
Why, Doug?
The IKEA effect.
Oh, wow. You're going to connect the one that was the outlier.
Yep. Yep. You see what I'm right?
Yeah.
So risk aversion is understanding how comfortable is somebody with uncertainty, realizing that people are uncomfortable with uncertainty.
Yeah.
Right. You know, when I left Merrill Lynch, the number one question I got asked was, you know, how could I do that? Wasn't that a risky decision to leave a big company? Mm-hmm. I was like, you know, you take a look at where the direction of the company is going and things like this. I felt it was less risky to control my own destiny.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Those are all these things that kind of come together and play into risk aversion or risk tolerance. So when you're talking to your customers, when you're talking to your employees, where are the places they take risk? Where are the situations that they take risk? Where are the situations that they don't take risk? You know, one of the things that I found about business owners, and this is true for me, I keep a much higher percentage of my net worth in cash than I did before I owned a business. And I found when I was advising business owners on the financial side, that was true. And my theory behind that is they take so much risk in, like there's so much risk tolerance that they have to manage the business that it balances out in other places. Like that's the other thing about these principles is they're heuristics. So they're general rules. They're not, you know, they're never 100%, but to say somebody is risk averse is most often incorrect, because what you're really saying is they're risk averse here.
Yeah.
There's other things that they do. Like I have a friend who's a big skier who does things skiing that just don't make any sense at all. But other decisions he makes, he's extremely risk averse, right?
Yep.
Those, like that understanding that we're different in different situations. So by the way, if you want him to do something that's riskier, equate it to skiing in some point. Where are the patterns of behavior? How do you follow those patterns?
That's an interesting approach. Attach it to the thing they're not as risk averse to. I like that.
And again, help them understand what the risks are. What are the risks of action? What are the risks of inaction? Right. That's where like we're in the process right now of making a hiring decision on someone who could have a really strong impact on the business.
Yep.
Right. They could also not have. I mean, they could have a really strong impact on the business. That could be
positive
good,
or negative. Yeah.
Right. And so, you know, it's, I mean, I can tell you going through the analysis right now and putting that together, you know, I thought you were trying to, you know, smack me with the effects that you chose. Cause it's like, yep, this is what I'm dealing with. Right. Because remember, it's not certainty or uncertainty that drives it. It's the perception of certainty.
Yep.
Right. Because I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but I feel like this is more likely that like all of those things come about. And so understanding and so a lot of what I'm doing is trying to say, okay, here's, you know, what's the scenario look like if we do this? What's the scenario look like that, you know, if we don't do it, what does this mean? Right. And managing that, what do we do in a situation like if this were to happen and then X were, et cetera, et cetera.
So you called out the IKEA effect, which is the outlier. Now, I pulled that one because it attaches, it comes into play with the endowment effect, which does align with what we've talked about. So let's talk about IKEA effect first. What is the IKEA effect?
Okay, so this is the one that is not, where behavioral economics is not our source for the definition. We went to a highly reputable source for this.
Wikipedia. Yes.
The IKEA effect is a cognitive bias in which consumers place a disproportionately high value on products they partially created. The name refers to Swedish manufacturer and furniture retailer IKEA, which sells many items of furniture that require assembly. Basically, we value those things we're involved in more than we value those things we're not involved in.
So how do you manage that in the sale? How do you get your buyer to have that, to feel like they've created it, to feel like they have that ownership?
There's two things that you do and two places that get missed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the art of influence is is motivating somebody to do something that they wouldn't have done otherwise, but they thought it was their idea to do it, right? How do you do that? That's where, high levels of collaboration. One of the things that I see that happens far too often, and the place where salespeople miss it, I've seen salespeople, it's why discovery needs to be far more dynamic than it is. Far too often it's just a pure interview. I've always said that the definition of a good question in a sales interaction is one where the person answering the question is the one who does most of the learning. Yep. So when I ask you a question about your business and you answer that question to me and you learn more about your business than I learn about your business, that was a good question, right? You're now participating in defining the problem. The place where it's even more important is you need to participate in defining the solution. These aspect of the sale today that I see missed more than anything else is a phase in the sale that I call solution design. That conversation of what do you need to solve the problem? If this is the problem, what needs to happen? The thing about selling is an active sport. Mm-hmm. Selling is a high participation sport. There's an aspect of making it easy, quote unquote, make it easy for people to buy, gets misunderstood as make it passive for people to buy. So what I see is salespeople want to make it easy. This is why the challenger model works, because the challenger model makes you you, the buyer, an active participant in the conversation. So an active solution design, rather than just coming in and saying, here, let me present my wonderful solution to you. That's one way that you've now participated in the solution. You've participated in defining what the problem is. You've participated in defining the solution. This is now your solution. It's not my solution. One of the key metrics that we use to assess client health is, does our client perceive this as a lift issue or a name of the client issue? Mm-hmm. That's an example of the IKEA effect. So the other thing to do, and it's funny because I'm seeing more resistance to this. This is why I always assign homework, right? Why do we have you complete a profile, right? Why do we have you complete a scorecard? Why do we have you do these things? Well, one thing is, if you're not going to spend 10 minutes to fill out a survey, you're not going to spend $20,000 on something,
right?
I've seen some people make it so hard. And lots of things in the survey, it's like, okay, well, wait a second. That's actually stuff that you shouldn't need to ask. Again, that survey should cause the person to learn more about their situation, should help them define what their issues are. But having them do active things makes them part of the assembly.
Yep.
Right? And by the way, they're a hell of a lot less likely to no-show you. They're a hell of a lot less likely to not respond to something. As a matter of fact, I'm looking at an opportunity where I'm shocked. We got ghosted. I'm pretty sure we got ghosted because they perceive our fee as being, too high to maybe even way too high. But I also realize I didn't have them do any real homework.
Yeah.
I'm kicking myself. I see the mistake, and now it's not a part of. So they weren't an active part of the solution. It was an outlier thing, just enough that I felt like our typical homework there, didn't, wasn't on point, et cetera. I'm convinced. I'm not saying that we would be winning the sale necessarily.
Sure.
But I don't think we would have been no-showed.
Yeah.
I don't think we would have been ghosted.
So this connects to the last one that I want to talk about, which is the endowment effect. So you've talked about, this is now your solution, not my solution, which really feeds into the endowment effect. So can you talk about what that is?
The endowment effect. Have you seen the show The Irrational?
No, I haven't.
It's an NBC show that there's always a behavioral economics principle that's taking place in the show. In an episode recently, where the endowment effect was the bias occurs when we overvalue something that we own, regardless of its objective market value. It is evident when people become relatively reluctant to part with a good they own for its cash equivalent, or if the amount that people are willing to pay for the good is lower than what they are willing to accept when selling it. Basically, if you own something, someone needs to pay you far more than what you would have been willing to spend if you didn't own it.
Yep.
It's why we have garage sales. The stuff stayed along for so long that you couldn't part your way. And it's why half the stuff, you start taking stuff off of the garage sale table, right? That's the endowment effect. Once we have it, it's ours. We fear giving it up, which, by the way, is highly connected to the certainty principle, the uncertainty principle.
Well, I was going to say, so this is where IKEA effect, I think, actually does connect.
The problem that I have.
Yep.
Right. We begin to define our life by the problem that we have and so on and so forth, which connects to the status quo bias.
Yeah, that's what pulls you out of the inertia. So it does actually connect. I didn't just throw it in there for shits and giggles. Anything else you want to add on endowment effect? Or I have a couple of takeaways.
Yeah, I think the thing that you've got to do is again, from a leadership standpoint or a sales standpoint, and aren't they both basically the same thing? Ownership is so important. One of our principles of execution is agency is critical. Ownership is critical, right? The more you can make this theirs, the more likely they are to stay on course and to favor you over something else.
Yep. So my couple of takeaways, and I mean, you hit on a lot of it there, but clear communication, calling out, where the unknowns are, sell the problem, which we've talked about many, many times. I liked what you said about making the discovery more dynamic and that gets lost. And I mean, that feeds into sales, that feeds into how we implement, that feeds into L&D, that touches so many pieces. But I agree with you. That's a piece of the sales process that gets missed. And then the last thing you said about agency and ownership being critical, totally agree. Make this their solution, not your solution. Make this their problem.
Spend more time collaborating on the solution. By the way, that's true with your employees.
Mm-hmm.
It's true if you're in RevOps and you're trying to get sales to move along. If you look at so much of why we're able to, I think, execute faster than others is how we get people involved in the solution. It's why we strive, use their language,
yep.
Right? The more that it's theirs, the better that we are. The more you understand this aspect and you create, I mean, in so many ways, everything that we talked about was balancing certainty and uncertainty in a way that people can move forward confidently. And the more you can do that, the more you're saying no to shitty RevOps.
Till next time.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the RevOps Show. If you haven't already, go ahead and follow us on Apple or Spotify. And while you're at it, subscribe to our YouTube channel. All links are going to be linked in the show notes for you. And if you have any inquiries about the show or have any questions that you want Doug and Jess to answer, feel free to email me at hannah@liftenablement.com. At the end of the day, understanding why people do what they do helps us make better decisions, create better experiences, and most importantly, say no to shitty RevOps. Catch you next time.